Dear learners, I welcome you back to another session of Research Methodology for Tourism and Hospitality Management. In the last class, we studied review of literature, the basic facts related to why review of literature is important. You must be knowing now that knowledge is generated at different levels, and having a wide search on the literature sources is very important for making your dissertation or for completing your research project. So in today's lecture, we will be going through different areas of research literature search and how to process the work and how to go ahead with your writing. While completing this course, you would be in a better condition to understand how to complete your work on review of literature. Three important topics today we will be discussing. Number one, what is to be searched, and number two, how it will be searched, and third is where, the sources where we have to look for the literature. Let us start. As a scholar or a student, you might be having a lot of confusion in your mind while you are thinking of a writing or developing the conceptual ideas for your dissertation work or for your PhD dissertation as well. Teachers used to say, search relevant information. So what we should search? This is the question to be addressed today. So first thing is, when you do Google search, you use some keywords or you may use some questions. ChatGPT and AI tools allow you to give prompt. Accordingly, the information is displayed. So in this ocean of knowledge, or you can say the ocean of information too, what exactly we need? This process has to be little careful and technical. And number one is the area that we have to work on, the broad area on which your dissertation or your PhD thesis is figured on. So while you go through a number of topics, some areas you may find close to your topic, some areas may be too broad. So your job is to select all together and bring close to your required level. In this process, we have to identify the objectives. What is your research objective? And you have to specify this objective one by one. Accordingly, you have to use your strategy for search. So, first point to note is searching the relevant information based upon the objectives. While you collect the information, maybe it is related to thesis or maybe published literature, you will organize it in your computer, or you may also keep printouts of the same. So this is not easy process to read from the beginning till the end. We have to identify what exact information we need. So number one is you have to look for theories if you are working with quantitative research. Theories also suggest models. So you have to identify and flag all the theories which is useful for your work and the appropriate research models which you can be used in your research work. If it is qualitative research, then you have to also think about the different context, not the context and the studies conducted in different countries. A very important aspect of review of literature is to identify terms and definitions. So while you are doing your research, your teacher will ask you what is the operational definition of a particular variable. And this definition is very important for quantitative researchers. You know that independent and dependent variables that we use. So it is very important to note that we should have relevant operational definitions and who provided this information or who provided this definition. Though we broadly classify research methods into three: quantitative, qualitative and mixed methods, there are different variations used under these broad categories. So, it is important to highlight those methods which are applicable in specific area. For example, if I am doing a qualitative research, then I have to think about what is the appropriate research method useful for me. We know phenomenology, ethnography, case study, grounded theory and a number of other branches of qualitative research. So, I have to go in detail about a identified area if it is ethnography or grounded theory. Then I have to design how I am going to work with. And if it is related to a quantitative research, it is also important to note down how different authors used the survey method and what are the best part that you can take from each research. So, in a way, you identify relevant research areas, mentioned research methods and use it for your purpose which you feel appropriate. I frequently come across a problem while writing research papers. So, one of the critical area reviewers look is research methodology. Is the methodology sound and robust? How do you know that? No, it is not easy. Like we know, we read books and we apply such techniques in our research. But we have to give due citations to the authors or the researchers who proposed methods or who applied it in their research. So, it is very important to go through the methodology part of research dissertations or research projects or in case of research papers. We come across a number of Google forms circulated through our WhatsApp groups as part of different studies. So, after COVID, people started using Google Forms or online data collection methods very frequently. Do we have any specific guideline to use such kind of forms? So, in the beginning there was no such information available because we come across a number of studies which use online questionnaire form filling. But in my point of view, it is important to note that use appropriate references because we know collecting data physically, this is a very acceptable method and we have a background that we are using a particular sampling method. But imagine if I conduct a study, I design a Google form and I circulate it with my friends, they circulate it with their own friends, like that a chain reaction is happening. So, ultimately the researcher, I have no control over the questionnaire which is circulated at the end. So, this point has to be noted very carefully. When we use review of literature, we come to know about different type of sampling and sampling frameworks used by different authors, so that we can adapt appropriate sampling design for our work. The last point to note is research instrument. Students using quantitative techniques have to take this point very seriously because we use questionnaires. The items used in the questionnaire, it may not be appropriate at times. A researcher find difficulty after the collection of data, when the data analysis is happening, the required results may not come. So, we call statistical scales that we use. So, it is important to go through the source literature. A researcher who initially proposed a scale which we can adopt it in our studies. So, instrument here means questionnaire content that include the items and constructs. For qualitative researchers, if you go through research articles, in the appendix we can find the questions. If it is semi-structured interview, we can find the semi-structured questions which the questionnaire which is designed by the researcher. So it will give an idea about the instrument. So in a nutshell, to brief about this slide, as a novice researcher or a student, you can find a number of useful information while you do your review of literature. First is you figure out your area, which area you can work out, and ending with instruments used by previous researchers. This all will help you to carry out your study systematically. I frequently quote Chris Hart in these lectures because his work doing a review of literature is widely cited and used by researchers. Chris Hart recommends the following steps to identify relevant literature. So the first point is defining the topic. That defining the topic include from a general area to a specific point. So as I said in the previous slide, that we have a broad area in mind, but you have to work on a specific area. So we can say a microscopic view of the subject that you are going to deal with. And the second aspect is the time frame and the language, because the scope of the topic matters a lot. A different part of the world, people speak different languages, and research literature is also available in different language. You can find that most of the literature is available in English, but we also have literature from Spanish, French, Italian, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, all these languages research literature is available. If I am working on an area and if I find some researches are already done in Spain or Italy or France where such literature is available in that language, so I find a difficulty in translating the meaning. So we have to define the scope. Number one is the geographical area wise. Number two, the region. And three, language. So this comes under the scoping part. The most important aspect while planning your literature review is what is the goal of your study? What are the expected outcomes? So if your study is aimed at designing a model, then you have to work accordingly, get the data collection done properly, develop the scale appropriately, and a valid statistical model that involves lot of experimentation. So your research aim matters while you are doing your research literature review. Another important point to note here is you have to keep a register or a copy available at your end while you are reading, because you may use your laptop, you can highlight, but always keep a pen and paper ready at your end so that you can note down important points and flag this with the relevant literature source, so that in the future when you want to reuse this material, you will be remembering that I noted it down in a particular copy and you can use it in your future researches. As a researcher and as a teacher, I find a great difficulty while planning my researches. Access to information. Can you believe that most of the colleges and universities in India, we don't have access to good research material? I am fortunate that Banaras Hindu University has a very good collection of books and journals in our library. But I look at the point of a student who is enrolled in research in a college or a university which doesn't have such resources. So quality information, if it is not available, that will impact your work. So as a researcher, we keep our time frame to visit different libraries or archives and plan it accordingly so that your work should not be impacted because of lack of information. I recommend my students to make friends with students from different backgrounds and different institutions like IITs in India and IIMs. They have the best resources in terms of literature collections. So when we develop our professional network, if you have a friend or a faculty member known to you in these institutions, they can help you out. While if you need a particular article, you can mail them, sir or madam, kindly share this material because I am unable to get it. It may be needed payment, or you may not have access to good Wi-Fi to download such materials. You may not be even aware that such repositories are existing. So if you are staying at a remote area, keep a plan to visit some libraries of good reputation or institutions, communicate with the librarian and get a temporary ID and password to use their resources for your research purpose. The last point to note here is where we can find appropriate information. CABI abstracts, EBSCO, ProQuest. These are some of the indexing sources where if you look for a particular area of work, you can access the abstract, because when you read the abstract, you will have an idea about what the research is all about. So dear students, tag this in your copy that when you read, if you look for scientific and empirical information, authentic information, look for such resources like a CABI, ProQuest, EBSCO, Dimensions, such kind of websites where you can easily access this information. So how you start your work? Number one is like you can have a quick reading of some terms which you given as a kind of search query. When you search, you come across number of theses or dissertations, or even you can say research articles. So do you think you can go through all the articles? It is absolutely impossible for a human being. We have our limitations in terms of, imagine screen time, that how much time you have to pay attention, your eyes to the computer screen or your mobile screen. Or you may have, mundane job that you are doing, it will affect your health too. So how smartly you can do your work? Number one is search the keyword and identify the titles. Look at the title of the work, and when you go through the title, you can understand that sounds useful or not. And the second is go through the abstract carefully. The abstract will speak about the goals of the study, it will speak the method, it also briefly share the outcomes of the study, and finally you can see the keywords. So the best strategy is using these three: title, abstract and keyword. So when you do the initial search, we can create a mapping of our resources. Like one is core area which we can use, and the other side is the peripheral area. And finally, when you shortlist the articles, maximum articles will come from the core area. So few more points to remember here is the secondary information that you are looking for and the search topics that connect it appropriately or not, and a review of terms. There would be contradicting information that you get at times, and there would be different way interpretations are made on terms. So learners, make sure that you adequately give time to clarify your doubts while you are searching literature. So what are the sources of information? We have seen in the last lecture, but I made it more clearly here, very specific. One is an individual who is a resource person whom you can classify, whom you can interact personally and get the information. Number two is library catalogs. Visit a library, you have the library resources at your end. You can use that. And third one is online. Online, now Google Scholar is one of the widely used search material, and if you look for other resources freely available to paid, there are different websites offering services. So you can search online information too. Sources like archives, internet archives, or books or reference material freely provided by different universities. So this also we can have one basic source of our required literature source. And we can classify it into broadly three, that is primary, second one is secondary, and the third one is tertiary. So what is included in primary? The primary sources are raw data where we don't have much information on the meaning of it, exact interpretation. For example, I quote here court judgments. Court judgments which are uploaded in the website, that is a wonderful resource for all of us. If imagine tourism and environment, you must have heard about the National Green Tribunal, which looks after the environmental issues, cases raised at a national level. So you want to use the references, we can use such kind of resources as our primary source. Secondary sources which are giving interpretation to the primary source. Imagine somebody has written a blog on a particular issue, and that issue is based upon certain judgments related to, you can say that it may be an environmental crisis or it may be specific environmental impact due to a tourism project. And the third aspect is encyclopedia and textbooks. The tertiary sources are at the third phase when somebody is interpreting the secondary information and making use of it for their research. For example, if I am thinking of a research project, I look for the books and I look for the primary sources in the beginning. Then I look for any kind of interpretations available on a particular area that eases my job. And at the third level, already somebody has written, somebody did research, some amount of research on an area. So tertiary sources we can identify in that way. According to Hart proposes the following strategy to do your review of literature. So as a researcher, you have to keep a separate file or keep a listing of the references that we are doing, that we can say bibliography. So imagine today you read a book on review of literature. So that is Hart 1998, that is on doing a review of literature. So that is coming under published books or the PDF version available online. So you keep one aspect, one area of which your work is on literature sources, and this is directly related to methods. And in that particular book you found a reference, and this reference, it seems to be useful for you. So you have to do a recheck and you find another reference. So like a kind of back and forth you have to do searches. So you will have every level you update your references, and finally you will have a bibliography, a listing of the references that you made at the end of your work. What is bibliography? The sources helped you to make your content, and you make it in a alphabetical order. So references come while you are going through thesis or conference proceedings, or while you are going through journals, or while you are going through the published books or published sources. So learners, please make sure that you have a clear strategy while you are doing your review of literature. Make sure that the language that you are using, you can read it and you can understand it. I don't encourage Google Translate because that may not give you exact translation of the actual research work. There would be other AI tools or softwares which can convert languages. But in my point of view is, keep this as a limiting area, scope, language, region of work. Find out identical research from your own geographical area. If the context is Asia, think of such researches happening in Asia. Look for recent publications. You may have publications from maybe 100 years or 200 years back, but you have to go with the recent or latest one. The type of literature is another important point. You may have a different type of literature like reports or proceedings, blogs, dissertation, thesis, etc. So shortlist and keep an eye on what kind of information you are having. So while we go through the process, the first aspect is generate a keyword, appropriate keyword. The keyword should relate to your research work. It should represent the questions and objectives. And where you will apply these keywords, you can use in Google search as well, but using it in indexes, identifying indexes, as I said earlier, CABI or catalogs or abstracts like EBSCO, ProQuest, which I remind you again, you can search with this keyword. If you have access to Web of Science or Scopus, which will help you to identify more articles or research material. So you will have an initial reading and you may discuss with your research supervisor or your group or your friends. So we can identify through your friend circle as well whether the work which you are doing is appropriate. And the last point here to make is relevance tree. So what is a relevance tree? Relevance tree is like a tree which has multiple branches. The tree has roots and main trunk. The branches which is having several twigs and it has leaves. So we start with research questions in the beginning. We identify then 2 or more subject area and it will further divide into sub areas, and while looking at the sub areas you search for the relevant information and an impactful researcher, whether it is relevant to you, and starting the search. The diagram which I am going to explain you in the next slide will help you practically how it is useful. You heard about destination image is an important aspect and it influences the decision making. A very recent literature published in Journal of Travel Research, it says virtual influencers, their influence on destinations that reflect in the decision making of tourists. So we have major research question is how do the destination image influence decision making of tourists. So what comes into mind quickly? One is destination image and the second one is decision making process. So when I do it further subdivision, my source of information is social media or the people who are advertising it, maybe through television or FM radio or maybe through my WhatsApp friends. Now I come to know about the destinations. For example, during the Chardham Yatra, you must have heard about lot of people visited Kedarnath, Badrinath, Gangotri and Yamunotri. So it influences me too. I should also visit such places. Or the social media, at times you find trending topics. So this influences us. That will help us or that will impact in our decision making. There are 2 points to note. One is cognitive and the second one is affective. So cognitive and affective image, how it is further divided? Like one is what is reflecting in my mind as an interpretation or a previous experience or evaluative the particular scenario. So this way it goes further down and you can understand several researchers have already made on destination image. So I can identify the appropriate scale items or the appropriate methods I can find while using such keywords. For example, destination image, decision making process. So I write here a small query. Let me share you. That one is destination image and decision making. So you can expand this query and get appropriate information like authenticity or promotion, a number of other terms that you can add. So dear learners, let us conclude what we discussed in this lecture. I started with the area of your research work which plays an important role in literature sources, and we have seen the process involved, systematic process of identifying the topics, identifying the research area, how it will be useful for shaping your chapter literature review in your dissertation or in your PhD thesis. At the end, we discuss the relevance tree, a simple example of breaking down the topics into sub-themes and searching the relevant information. I hope you got an insight about review of literature process today. If you have any queries, feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.